I'm calling to order this hearing or roundtable. This is a public roundtable of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chair of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Thursday, March 28th, 2024. The time is 1:29 in the afternoon. This hearing is being held live in person in room 412 of the Johnny Wilson Building, although the hearing notice says 1:20. The subject of this roundtable today is consideration or public comment on 4 nominations for appointment to the Historic Preservation Review Board. They are PR 22-655, entitled the Historic Preservation Review Board, Bill Marzella Confirmation Resolution of 2024, which was introduced at the request of the mayor on Tuesday, February 27th. And Mr. Marzella would be confirmed for an appointment to end July 21st, 2026. The second is, these are not in particular order, PR 25-658, entitled Historic Preservation Review Board, Andrew Auerbach Confirmation Resolution of 2024, introduced at the request of the mayor on February 27th of this year, to confirm the reappointment of Mr. Auerbach for a term to end July 21st, 2027. So it gets a little complicated. Mr. Marzella would be an architectural historian member of the board, and Mr. Auerbach would be a historian member of the board. The third is PR 25-659, entitled the Historic Preservation Review Board, Gretchen Failer Confirmation Resolution of 2024, to confirm the reappointment of Ms. Failer for a term to end July 21st, 2027. And she knows what she is. She's an architect member of the board. And the fourth is PR 25-660, entitled Historic Preservation Review Board, Patrick Williams Confirmation Resolution of 2024, introduced at the request of the mayor on February 27th of this year. And this would confirm the appointment of Mr. Williams as an architectural historian. Maybe that's wrong. As an architect member of the board for a term to end July 21st, 2025. The hearing notice actually included 2 other nominations. It's a little unclear to me what's going on with those, but they're not going to be considered today. So we have just the 4 before us. The board, the Historic Preservation Review Board, is the official body of advisors appointed by the mayor to guide the government and public on the preservation of historic buildings and property in the District of Columbia. The board also assists with the implementation of federal preservation programs and the review of federal projects in the district. The board has been unable to meet since February because it has lacked a quorum, and the mayor did not transmit these nominations until February 27th. The purpose of this roundtable is to afford the public an opportunity to testify as to the fitness of the nominees, and also an opportunity for the committee to ask some questions of the nominees and ensure that they're ready, willing, and able to serve on the Historic Preservation Review Board. The record in this matter will not be open very long. It will close at 5 p.m. this Monday, April 1st. That's because due to a lack of a quorum, we're going to move very quickly with the appointments. But if anyone, and I'm not referring to anybody in the chamber, but anyone has an issue, they need to let us know right away. Again, before 5 p.m. this coming Monday, April 1st. With that, let me ask the first non-nominee witness to come forward, Rebecca Miller from the TC Preservation League. We're not going to put you on a clock, but that doesn't mean go for a half an hour. Or go for a half an hour, you'll hear a thump when I fall off my
It's
chair.
not going to be a half hour. I can assure you, and it's not much different from previous hearings. So, good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Miller. I'm the Executive Director of the DC Preservation League. I am happy to be here today to testify on the two new appointments and the reappointments to the Historic Preservation Review Board. As a note with regards to one of the candidates that was removed, our understanding is that that person is interested in serving, but the notice that was given to them about today's roundtable was insufficient for them to change their plans. So they don't wish to be withdrawn from consideration. They just were not able to make it today.
Okay, that's helpful to know.
Yeah, thank you. So DC's historic preservation law is one of the country's strongest and most successful ordinances. HPRB members' mandate is to implement and maintain the law on behalf of the mayor through the designation of historic landmarks and districts and the review of development projects affecting historic properties. DCPL testifies before HPRB regularly by providing reviews of major development projects or making presentations on landmark nominations. Applicants and members of the public expect the HPRB to be a high-functioning body that understands and appropriately applies the regulations enacted to implement the Historic Landmark and Historic District Protection Act of 1978. They are also expected to have regularly scheduled meetings to take place. The lack of mayoral appointments to the HPRB has resulted in 2 months of missed hearings. The HPRB, the Historic Preservation Program, is already under much scrutiny at this moment, with opponents contending that the review process adds additional time and cost to projects. Delayed proceedings due to lack of statutory minimum that has been the case for the last 2 months should never have happened. As DCPL has testified in the past, 2 sets of regulations govern the makeup of the HPRB. One at the federal level, mandating certain professional qualifications be represented to allow participation in the National Register programs and qualify for federal grant money. And the other at the city level, requiring representation of the composition of the adult population of the District of Columbia with regard to race, sex, geographic distribution, and other demographic characteristics. Once approved by the council, there will be no members of the boards from wards 1 to 7 or 8. There are, however, 3 board members from Ward 3, which was pointed out by Councilmember Trayon White at the recent mayor's agent hearing on the St. Elizabeth's East Campus. He testified to his concern that there was no representation east of the river, an area of the city rich in cultural and architectural history, experiencing extraordinary development pressures within the Anacostia and St. Elizabeth's historic districts. Geographic diversity is vital for communities to feel that their views are considered when decisions are being made about their communities. DCPL has expressed its concern to both your office and the Historic Preservation Office about this issue in the past, and we recognize that it is very difficult to find candidates. It is a very time-consuming board and takes a lot of time and energy to do so. On to the candidates now. And I'd like to start off by saying that this is not meant to be a personal attack. Mr. Auerbach is a wonderful man, but DCPL has expressed its concern in the past regarding statements that Mr. Auerbach has made at past hearings. Specifically, Mr. Auerbach recused himself due to a conflict of interest related to the St. Elizabeth's Historic District, also disclosed in his pre-roundtable questionnaire. Despite this conflict, Mr. Auerbach remained in the hearing room for the case. He also addressed DCPL's testimony in opposition to the demolition of 2 contributing buildings on the campus and our concerns about the city's deferred maintenance and their negligence that resulted in the fire that destroyed the sole remaining barn in the District of Columbia. DCPL felt this was inappropriate and should have been shut down immediately by the chair of the board. As we testified previously, DCPL does not believe that Mr. Auerbach meets the qualifications of a historian, and more so of a citizen member of the board. We believe his recategorization as a citizen would then put the pressure on to find a historian that would meet these criterias and could speak to and err towards the social and cultural significance of properties. The DC inventory of historic sites is, we're working diligently to diversify it as much as possible. Many of these sites are culturally significant, not necessarily architecturally significant. And with the appointment of these additional individuals, it will be a very architecture heavy review board. So having a voice that can talk about the cultural history and significance of sites is very, very important. In addition to training on the Historic Preservation Act and its applicable regulations, DCPL requests that the city provide conflict of interest training to HPRB members so that they understand appropriate disclosure and procedures going forward. DCPL supports the reappointment of Ms. Failer and the appointment of Bill Marzella. Both have proven experience and demonstrated interest in the historic preservation field. Mr. Marzella has undertaken several roles in his career, from researching and documenting landmarks in historic districts to working with the development community on the redevelopment and adaptive reuse of historic buildings, as is Ms. Failer, but she's been proven to do that previously. We are taking no position today on Mr. Williams. DCPL reached out twice by email to schedule a meeting to discuss his appointment, background, and interest in historic preservation. Unfortunately, the request went without response. Mr. Williams has an impressive background in architecture and responded knowledgeably to the pre-hearing questions. DCPL has had no prior interactions with Mr. Williams and wishes we could have met him directly before this roundtable. And finally, DCPL spoke with Ms. Gabrielle Miller last year regarding her appointment as the archaeologist, and we are confident in her ability to carry out this responsibility. Unfortunately, she could not attend today. With the tremendous positive economic and social impact on our city, residents and others who invest in historic preservation in our city deserve a high-functioning board that is well-versed in its responsibilities. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Who was it who did not, whom that you've not met?
Mr. Williams, Patrick Williams.
And you just didn't get a response.
Correct.
And I don't have a copy of your statement.
I sent it while I was sitting there waiting on this hearing. So you'll have it
I'm looking to see if it's coming through
immediately.
airwave. You see that it's interesting you make the comment about both the geographic diversity and also, I'll say, professional diversity. So I hadn't quite thought of it, but a little bit too architecturally oriented.
It's very hard. Well, you have two architectural historians, one of which is an architect as well. You have another architect. Well, there's 1, 2, 3 architects on the board currently.
Matthew Bell, Marnie Keith, and Gretchen Failer.
Yes.
And you've seen this play out, or you think it could play out in terms of not being as, how do I want to put it, bringing enough perspective to looking at cultural landmarks as opposed to architectural landmarks?
We've seen it play out. It doesn't necessarily mean that a designation would it be denied or approved based on that. But I think it needs a greater discussion, given the fact, and it's well documented, that the history of underserved communities tends to be more cultural, and that's the sites that are associated with them are not necessarily the sites that some would deem as high value. So it might just be an individual row house in a neighborhood that's not necessarily a historic district, and it may have lost a little bit of its integrity. So the question comes up a lot, well, should we just put up a sign instead of keeping the building, kind of thing? And so I think that having a historian that can talk to the academic discussion behind the importance of cultural history would really benefit this board.
With regard to the geographic diversity, how did we get where we are, or how do we fix it?
Well, in my written testimony, I do challenge HPO and DCPL to do more outreach to try and find individuals. I did reach out to Councilmember White, Ward 8, Councilmember White, asking if he had any suggestions given his concerns over the number of individuals from Ward 3 that were making design decisions on properties in his ward. So I sent an email asking if he had any input or any individuals he'd suggest, that since is an additional opening, one now, I guess two, available on the board that could offer a perspective and a demonstrated interest in historic preservation. And in this case, they don't have to be a professional member. They could be somebody who has a demonstrated interest, because we have the professional qualifications covered at the moment.
With the exception of archaeologist, but that person you said is still interested.
Correct.
I'm trying to remember, isn't there a profession in historic and antique archaeology? I got it wrong.
It's an archaeology has to be, it's historic and prehistoric, and she meets that criteria.
Okay.
So she does not, we don't need 2 seats for archaeology.
The quorum has meant that the board has not met for 2 months.
Correct, because there
And-
were only 4 and the statutory minimum is 5.
And how much of a backlog is this creating, or how problematic is the backlog?
That would be a great question for HPO. I don't know. I do know that we are against a deadline for a National Park Service grant it's our Asian Studies grant. And we were expecting to have 2 nominations heard this month so that the grant could be completed. So the information has been forwarded to the National Register at this point, but they're not listed in the DC inventory. So they're going straight to the National Register and will come back to the board. But that
Okay.
puts a little bit of an issue, but from a development perspective, any number of months, they'll have several development cases and whatnot. But I can't answer that more.
Okay, and we
extensively.
do have their budget hearing coming up. I don't remember the date, but is there enough time if the council votes on Tuesday the 2nd for the new members to get on board for the next meeting in April?
Yes, because the hearing's the 4th Thursday of the month. So if they're voted on, then, and hopefully receive some training, especially the new members, I think they can hit the ground running. It will be busy, but for maybe
Yeah.
this month and next month. And they do hold overflow hearings as well on the following Thursday from their hearing, if
Mhm.
necessary, which tends to be necessary almost every month.
Yeah, give me just a second. I don't have any other questions for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So let me call the nominees forward. Bill Marzella, Andrew Arbach, Gretchen Failer, and Patrick Williams. This is my first insight into collaborativeness among the members. Let me see. I think each of you has a statement. We've gotten the written answers to the pre-hearing questions we sent you. Thank you. And then I'll have a few questions. So let's begin with Mr. Marzella. And good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, good afternoon, Chair Mendelson, members of the committee. My name is Bill Marzella, and it is my pleasure to be here to be considered for a nomination to serve on the DC Historic Preservation Review Board. I'm grateful to Mayor Bowser for nominating me and honored to have this opportunity to serve the district as an HPRB member. My professional background is in architecture and in architectural history. After receiving my master's degree in historic preservation from Cornell University, I moved to the district in 2012 to work for a local architectural history consulting firm. During that period, I had the opportunity to touch many facets of DC's historic preservation landscape, including preparation of individual landmark and historic district nominations, design review and planning efforts, and historic district design guidelines. These efforts included frequent collaboration with the staff of the Historic Preservation Office and presentations before the HPRB. I am gratified to have contributed to some of the district's transformational revitalization projects during that time, including the rehabilitation of MLK Library and the Carnegie Library at Mount Vernon Square. For these projects in particular, I collaborated closely with property owners, developers, contractors, and architects to reimagine how these properties could be revitalized to support 21st century uses. In addition to extensive archival research and building survey to support these rehabilitation efforts, we developed submission and presentation materials for HPRB review and participated in many board meetings during that period, as some of my neighbors at this table may remember from a few years back. In preparation for these reviews, I collaborated closely with staff from the Historic Preservation Office, in addition to other design review agencies local to the district, such as the National Capital Planning Commission and the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts, all to navigate the complex entitlement processes necessary to revitalize and realize these visions. For the past 5 years, I have worked at the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, which is an independent federal agency located in DC that advises Congress and the President on national historic preservation policy. In my current role, I provide technical assistance to federal agencies in the treatment and management of historic properties in compliance with the National Historic Preservation Act. My work balances the missions of the federal government to achieve energy, infrastructure, transportation, housing, and recreation goals with consideration of effects to our nation's diverse historic resources. Since 2020, I have been a proud resident of Ward 5 and a homeowner in the Bloomingdale Historic District. I am a strong advocate for historic communities and their ability to create places that are more desirable to live and work. It has been well documented that historic buildings and neighborhoods are more affordable, dense, sustainable, and accessible for residents and small businesses. And I look forward to bringing this perspective and my broad architectural history background to the HPRB. So with that, thank you again, Chair Mendelson, for the opportunity to testify before the committee. I look forward to any questions you may have, and thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Marzella. Mr. Auerbach.
Good afternoon, Chair Mendelson. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today, and thanking your colleagues on the committee. My name is Andrew Auerbach. It's a pleasure to be here and to be considered for my reappointment to the Historic Preservation Review Board. I'm very grateful to Mayor Bowser for nominating me and honored to have this opportunity to continue to serve the residents of the District of Columbia. During my tenure on the board, we have witnessed significant progress in community engagement through digital platforms and the institutionalization of the notification process, both to the ANCs and the broader community, which is in large part due to the work of the fantastic Historic Preservation Office staff. Since COVID, we have met on a video platform, which to my estimation has resulted in many more members of the public being able to participate by viewing cases online or participating online through their testimony. Professionally, I'm a communications and sustainability consultant with a 30-year record of providing clients in both the public and private sector with a variety of services. My early career focused on documentary and public affairs television. I helped produce a number of award-winning historical pieces, such as on such figures as Vincent van Gogh, Hap Arnold, Rocky and Bullwinkle, and Hector Berlioz. My practice has evolved with technology advances to include interactive platforms and social media. I've received many peer awards for my documentary and video work. I was invited to join the Cleveland Park Historical Society Board in 2000, where I served for 2 terms. As my CPHS board term was winding down, then Mayor Adrian Fenty nominated me to the Historic Preservation Review Board. My service to both CPHS and HPRB stoked a deepening interest in the district and the relationship between the city and the environment. This led me to earn a master's degree in city and regional planning with a focus on sustainability. Soon thereafter, I was reappointed to the board by Mayor Gray and have used what I learned studying for my master's degree as part of a foundational approach to bringing sustainability to underserved communities in the district and throughout the region. It has been a meaningful and humbling experience to make direct connections between my studies, my interests, and my love of the district and its many communities to help people in a significant manner. Community engagement and volunteerism are central to my life. I have dedicated my time and efforts to a number of different organizations and causes, from coaching youth sports to serving on a variety of boards. In 2015, I worked with a small group of community members to establish and launch the Tenleytown Main Street, which is funded in part by the city. And the Main Street program is deeply intertwined with the preservation movement, as it is an initiative of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. The concept of historic preservation as both an urban planning tool and an act of sustainability is core to why I'm such a supporter of the preservation movement. However, the challenges today are different than those of 40 years ago. In a time of declining population in cities, preservation was a tool that helped stabilize the physical and cultural environment. With a growing population, the role of preservation is different. Over the last several cycles of my confirmation testimony, the district has evolved its standards and evaluation, particularly in the areas of affordable housing and sustainability. As noted previously, an ad hoc task force of the board evaluated the preservation guidelines and worked with the DC Office of Planning, the agency then known as DCRA, and DOEE to prompt the development of new guidelines that were adapted in 2020. These sustainability guidelines help the board in terms of providing clarity as it relates to sustainability and the challenges of compatibility. It's an honor to receive this reappointment and serve the city I love. Thank you, Chairperson Mendelson, for the opportunity to testify before this committee. I will be happy to respond to any questions from you or the members.
Thank you, Mr. Auerbach. Ms. Failer.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Mendelson and virtually members of the committee. I'm Gretchen Failer. It's my pleasure to receive your consideration for my nomination to serve on the Historic Preservation Review Board. I'm grateful to Mayor Muriel Bowser for nominating me and honored to have the opportunity to serve the residents of our district. Since its founding, Washington, D.C. has evolved, reflecting the significance of its citizens' social, political, and political activities and achievements through varied architectural and landscape lenses, including those of vernacular, local, regional, national, and international significance. It's been my privilege to work on projects within these types of frameworks through the 30 years of my career in preservation, restoration, and renovation of historic buildings and landscapes domestically and abroad. My professional qualifications and work experience exceed the minimum requirements of the Secretary of Interior standards and guidelines for professional qualifications and standards for architecture and historic architecture. My practice experience with existing buildings provides a solid understanding of the issues, historic preservation, project delivery methods, technical building documentation and assessments, integration of sustainable building solutions, building material treatments, preservation laws, and review processes and regulations. I have practiced, lectured, and published extensively on historic preservation and sustainability. My work has been recognized with more than 27 national, regional, state, and local preservation awards. I'm a fellow of the American Institute of Architects and a member of the American Institute of Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works, a member of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and the American Association for State and Local History. And I'm an inductee of the Lambda Alpha International. I've served on preservation and zoning commissions in other cities and have experience in developing legislation for historic districts to be integrated into existing zoning codes. I am past president of the Association for Preservation Technology International, a cross-disciplinary international organization dedicated to promoting the best technology for conserving historic structures and their settings. My philosophy about historic preservation is that it provides critical balance of the recognition of the past while encouraging future development and viability. I have approached my public service and my private practice with an informed, inclusive process that meets the cultural and economic needs of all. I am familiar with the district's preservation law, regulations, and guidelines. I'm dedicated to balancing historical significance and with viable, sustainable, and maintainable solutions, providing continued stewardship of our heritage. In 2001, I intentionally relocated to practice preservation architecture in DC because of the dedication, understanding, and participation in historic preservation in this region. I've lived and worked in several communities in the district and currently own a home in Capitol Hill's Northeast region. Over the last decades, some of my projects in the District of Columbia include the renovation of the WMATA Northern Bus Garage, the old post office, the Carter Woodson House, Planet Word, Carnegie Library, the Lincoln Memorial Home, the Decatur House, Eastern Market, the Washington Monument Visitor Center, the Washington Union Station Master Redevelopment Plan, and many buildings of the architect of the Capitol Complex, the National Gallery of Art, the Smithsonian Institution, and private projects in DC's waterfront, Anacostia Historic District, Capitol Hill Historic District, Georgetown, Pennsylvania Avenue, and Mount Pleasant Historic Districts. In 2010, I volunteered on the HPRB Sustainability Subcommittee to update several of the preservation guidelines for the District of Columbia. Through that effort, I was fortunate to be nominated and appointed to the HPRB in April of 2011. Serving as the chair for 4 years and then continuing as a board member since 2016, I've worked diligently and successfully through our preservation laws to develop solid consensus-built decisions to large and small scale significant projects that both preserve our heritage resources and enable development within our community. I initiated and sought out agency funding for solutions to integrate preservation into other guidelines. And I continue to make numerous public presentations to preservation, legal and development-based organizations on the function of the HPRB and issues related to historic preservation. I continue to work on the issues of sustainability, viability, and affordability within the parameters of our public process. I'm looking forward in anticipation of continued service on the review board, and I have 3 areas that I'm interested in focusing on. One is continuing on sustainability and preservation. I'm working to make the best use of the guidelines as developed and looking to expand their documentation and application beyond single-family residences. And then the functions of the board. I'll continue to serve and ensure that the public is heard during issues related to the board's purview on HPRB meetings. I'll continue to work with my fellow board members to continue the consistency and clarity of decisions made by the HPRB. And I'll continue to the HPRB's integration of the great weight afforded the ANC. We continue to be diligent on this effort and more overt in the communication of the recognition and the consideration that we give the ANC. Third is the change in use and affordability. I'll continue to work with HPO on affordable living resources for residents before the HPRB. This includes considering ways to assist existing residents in single and multifamily homes and finding ways to maintain and stay in their homes and communities. I will continue to work alongside HPO with the development of increased mixed use and residential density and increased affordable housing opportunities through the changes of use of our existing buildings. I believe my experiences, expertise, and approach to practice contribute significant value to the district's historic preservation review process. And if reconfirmed, I will use my knowledge to the best of my abilities to serve the District of Columbia. Thank you again, Chairperson Mendelson and the committee for the opportunity to testify. And I'd be happy to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Saylor. Patrick Williams, good afternoon.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairperson Mendelson and members of the committee. I am Patrick Williams. It is my pleasure to receive your consideration for my nomination to serve on the Historic Preservation Review Board. I'm grateful to Mayor Muriel E. Bowser for nominating me and honored to have this opportunity to serve the residents of our district. For over 30 years, I've been practicing architecture in the District of Columbia and the surrounding metro area, with the past 18 of those years as a resident of the district. My architectural experience has afforded me the opportunity to work internationally, as well as in New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia on a variety of projects, predominantly in the public realm. My interest in and experience with historic properties began at a very early stage of my architectural career, when in 1986, I was employed as supervisor of works at the Jamaica National Heritage Trust. For 3 years, I was responsible for conservation and preservation projects on national heritage sites in Jamaica. In 1989, after being nominated by the Jamaica chapter of the International Council on Monuments and Sites, I was awarded a place in the U.S. National Park Service Historic American Engineering Record, or HARE, program to document the historic U.S. Steel Mill Press Shop in Pittsburgh, PA. Since graduating with a Bachelor of Architecture degree from the City University of New York in 1993, I've been involved in several projects executed within the monumental core in the District of Columbia, including the DC Courthouse Restoration and Addition, Smithsonian Institutional Mall-wide perimeter security project, door and window replacements for the architect of the Capitol and the new Dunbar Senior High School. My architectural background and experience will be instrumental in assisting the Historic Preservation Review Board in performing the specific functions outlined in district and federal historic preservation laws, including the review of proposed construction for compatibility with historic properties in the district. Although created under the district's historic preservation law, HPRB also acts as a state review board for the district under the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. A key component of that act is the Section 106 review process. There's a common public misperception that the sole purpose of the Section 106 review process is to prevent any impacted historical site from demolition or alteration. That misperception overshadows the fact that without the process, historical properties would lose a significant protection. Deciding on different approaches to projects impacting historic properties requires informed collaboration that fosters solutions that are beneficial to all stakeholders and community interests. The District of Columbia has a rich architectural, planning, and real estate development culture. The city is home to notable examples of many important architectural movements of the 20th and 21st centuries, most notably the Beaux-Arts, Brutalism, and Postmodernism. With the knowledge that two of those architectural styles now fall within the 50-year threshold of eligibility for listing in the National Register, there is a need for thoughtful discourse and adjudication on the value of those existing properties to the district and to the nation. I look forward to playing a role in that conversation while serving on the HPRB. Thank you, Chairman Mendelson, for the opportunity to testify before this committee, and I will be happy to respond to questions from you and members of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. So I do have some questions for y'all. I'll start with this. I'm going to begin with you, Mr. Auerbach, because you have been on the commission. How much time does it take? How long are the meetings? How many meetings a month? What's involved with being a member?
So the board has a monthly scheduled meeting for 11 out of 12 months of the year. There's an additional spillover meeting or that can be, so the regularly scheduled board meeting is the fourth Wednesday of each month, on a Thursday. If there's enough of an agenda such that there's a spillover meeting required, it would happen that following week, whether that's the fifth Thursday or first Thursday thereafter. So there can be up to 22 meetings per year. Usually one meeting is a full 8-hour day, and a second meeting can be anywhere from a couple of hours to a full day as well. So in addition to the board time that's actually in session, there's also time spent by board members when we receive the what we used to call the board packets, but they're now all online, to review the cases. And that often requires going to the sites and doing an in-person evaluation of each of the sites that appear on the agenda, both the consent agenda as well as the regular board meeting. So, you know, it's up to 2 full days per month in terms of meetings, and then whatever time is available to do those reviews on site.
How often is there a spillover meeting?
I'd say most of the time.
And how much time?
Probably out of 11 months, probably 9 or 10.
And how much time do you spend preparing for a meeting?
It can be anywhere from 6 or 7 hours to 12 or 15 hours.
Thank you for that. So that was actually a setup for my question, which is, so do you have the time to serve if reappointed?
Yes, I've been doing this for a few cycles now, and I've been able to build it into my schedule, so I'm fully prepared to dedicate that time.
And Mr. Marzella, since you heard that answer, do you have the time to serve?
Yes, sir.
And Ms. Failer, do you have the time to serve?
I do.
And Mr. Williams?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Um, Recently, the committee's had a couple of hearings, had a hearing yesterday with regard to a proposed amendment to the historic preservation law, has to do with penalties. And we had performance oversight a couple of weeks ago. At both hearings, there were some witnesses who came forward and talked about how historic preservation increases the cost of development, increases the cost of housing, works against or hinders affordability. Um, How do you respond to that, Ms. Phelan?
The foremost aspect that we look for is how the case before us meets the requirements of the current preservation law. Should those things be amended or discussed or changed through the actions of the council, then we would consider those applications that are there. Certainly, I'm aware of other people's opinions about the cost or of affordability or improvement of affordability. However, the review of the case that's before us really is about the applicability and upholding the preservation law in request for the activity that's being proposed by the applicants.
So the law requires you to look at the standards that are set
Correct.
forth in the Historic Preservation Act
Mhm.
and not these other issues.
Correct.
So I'll go down the line, see if you all agree. Mr. Williams?
The chairman, yes, so I would definitely agree with that in general. Having not yet served on the HPRB, I mean, I think those would be deliberations that they would have with my other board members. I think there's a tendency within communities to sometimes push back on the designation of historic districts for those kinds of reasons. But I think with some outreach and education, that could be something that could be mitigated with education, with collaboration, and looking from everybody's point of view as a stakeholder.
Mr. Auerbach?
I agree with Ms. Baylor's response in terms of the board hearing an application based on its own merit as it relates to the DC preservation law and federal standards.
And Mr. Marcella?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I guess I would just add to what Ms. Failer said, that our general goal is to achieve compatibility and not necessarily perfection when it comes to preservation or, certain material or design standards. So that would be the mission.
But I actually meant the question a little bit more philosophically. So I appreciate the answer because it's an important answer. And I know in the past there have been some nominees where there's been criticism that they weren't looking at what the historic district or landmark standards require. But just philosophically, do you think that, and I'm looking at you, Ms. Failer, to start this, do you think that historic preservation has actually hindered affordability and has had adverse economic development consequences?
If you're asking me philosophically in my own profession and how I might opine on this, if we were talking about a political opinion of mine, not how I would rule on the board or act on the board, no, I don't believe that that's always the case. And I think there are a number of resources that the district has put in place, such as the grant program for low-income residents to have properties renovated and allowing people to maintain residency within their home. So there are additional things that the district has done in the short term to allow people to maintain their historic properties and stay in place. And combining with some of the initiatives that the district has in place through DCSU and DOEE for other funding resources. There are other things that are often expensive, like utilities and energy cost related items that the district has funding available as resources for people to stay in their homes or within their multifamily units or condominiums or apartments as they go forward. So philosophically, I don't believe that. As I would rule on the board, I am able to sort of contain my philosophical beliefs about preservation to determine how the request applies to the District of Columbia's preservation law.
As you were answering, I was thinking, yes, the assistance programs that the government provides are to help lower income or maybe lower middle income residents. But we had a witness yesterday who lives in the Anacostia Historic District who she went on at some length about how much development has occurred there and has not seen it as impeding, the district designation as impeding development. I'll go down the line if any of you want to add to that. Mr. Williams?
I would just say I agree fully with what Ms. Taylor said.
Mr. Albrecht?
I agree as well. I think one of the areas that's really a challenge for the board is when there's a proposal before us. I'll just use an example in the abstract of a 6-story building that's in on a commercial strip of a generally 2 or 3-story row house neighborhood. And we can look at 14th Street or some of the corridors in Shaw as an example. And in years past, the board had been very reticent to approve as presented those kinds of proposals. And it seems like over the last 6 or 8 years, the staff and the board have sort of evolved to come to accept some of that density, understanding that removing a floor or 2 floors curtails, housing units and potentially affordable housing units. The board's purview is the compatibility of that building. So we're not looking at it through the lens of, are we losing units? We're looking at it through the lens of compatibility. But it's an external pressure to understand the mission of the city to provide more housing and where preservation fits within that context.
Mr. Marzella?
Yeah, thank you. I guess I would agree with what my fellow nominees have said. I think within the preservation community, there's a fairly large amount of research and body of literature by extension that suggests, both locally and nationally, designation of historic districts, landmarks, et cetera, tends to stabilize property values over time by inhibiting things like incompatible development that's out of scale with the neighborhood, flipping, speculation, that sort of thing. So I think it could be argued that preservation as a planning tool can be a tool for affordability also.
Interesting. Thank you, each of you, for that. So, Mr. Marzella, you would be a new appointment to the board. How do you see that you could help the board?
Yeah, well, in addition to the kind of individual experience I have, I feel like I've worked with the board, I've worked with the local preservation community, the historic preservation office extensively. I think in my current capacity as a Fed working with federal agencies, I bring that kind of unique experience. And I think as Mr. Williams said, embracing the process that is known as Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, which is fundamentally built on a system of consultation with the public, with experts, with other agencies, with property owners, et cetera. And so I think bringing that spirit of decision-making based in consultation, I think will serve the board. And I think, yeah, just my professional and educational background will add to that.
Thank you, Ms. Failer. So you heard the testimony from the DC Preservation League about too many architects. That's not quite the way they put it, but too many architects. You are an architect. So how do you respond to that issue that, Lord, there are so many architects on the board and really too few people with cultural background?
I was actually glad to hear the DCPL say that, because that is something that we've been noticing as a gradual change in the district and on the review board. There are a number of historic districts and landmarks that we've had that very dialogue about in recent cases. One of them is the Kingman Park Historic District, where the social and political history of the Kingman Park Historic District is significantly more important as a consideration than the majority of the architecture within that building. Earlier than that, when I was the chair, we heard a case in Capitol Hill of the Furies, which was a lesbian publication residence within the historic district in a fairly unassuming architectural building. And so finding ways to be sure that we're considering all of those requirements is certainly part of the role of an architect and a preservation architect. When we are developing listings for the National Historic Register of Historic Places, we have to consider all of those aspects and what aspects are met and not met in the requirements. And so translating that also into the district's requirements for the DC listing is important. But I think because of the training that the architects have as preservation architects, it goes above and beyond new construction architecture where you're focusing on the building and construction. You're also trained to do writing and research and documentation to provide resources to document, to make the case for listings, as well as now considering them as on the review board. So I think there's some unique qualifications of the preservation architect that are above and beyond some of the requirements of an architect, which is why we have that specific requirement for the review board, is that the person serves as a historic architect or preservation architect, not just an architect, not to disparage people that are new construction architects. It's a very different expertise area.
So what I'm hearing is, yes, it's an issue. It's something that the board members are thinking about, but that it's not as much of a problem. If it's just me looking and saying, oh my God, these are all architects, it's actually, there's some nuance there and there's a bit more sensitivity.
Yeah, I think not only the board has opined on cases where this is a significant and the qualifying attribute for the listing on the National Register and the DC listing. And so we have reviewed that and discussed that with the board that we have in place. And I think that the architects have the training to do that. I think that can be enhanced with our historian and architectural historians' experience in the listings to serve that. But I think that the architects that are on the board have an awareness of those requirements and what's required to meet those considerations under a DC listing or a national listing.
Thank you. Mr. Auerbach, in your statement, I want you to elaborate on this sentence. The board still wrestles with the challenges of compatibility for new and expanded buildings with affordable housing.
Sure, and this relates to my last statement in the last round of testimony. There's pressure in the city for more housing. That's an external value. Historic preservation in and of itself is a value. We on the board have to weigh the merits of an application based on the preservation value. That's the law that we follow. But we all live in the city. We understand the pressures of housing affordability and affordable housing. So as human beings, there's that understanding that we need more housing in this city and more affordable housing in this city. So our mandate is to follow the law and the compatibility of new of applications as they come before us, whether it's new buildings or adaptive reuse. But we also understand, just as human beings, that there's this value of wanting to have as much affordable housing and housing units in general to help bring the supply up and thus reduce the overall costs. But that's not our purview. But it's that tension is there when we're hearing cases and when we hear public testimony.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, in testimony, the Preservation League said they'd reached out to meet with you and you've not met with them?
Yes, I received an email, I think maybe 2 emails from Ms. Miller of DCPL requesting for, I guess, a chat or a Zoom call prior to this meeting. I didn't know what quite to make of it. I actually thought that because of the fact that I was being nominated for this position, I should be, presented here first before talking with any other external stakeholders. I have no qualms with meeting with DCPL after this.
So you'd be willing to meet with them?
I'm sorry?
You're willing to meet with them?
Oh, yes, certainly.
Meet with them before the council votes?
Sure.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you. So let me ask, I have 2 more questions here that I know of. One of them is conflicts of interest. I always ask this of nominees, whatever the board is. I know that from time to time there may be a conflict of interest. My question is, do you know of any potential conflicts of interest that would affect your serving on the board? And if there were a conflict of interest, how would you handle that? Mr. Auerbach?
Sure. As I disclosed, I live in Chevy Chase, DC. There's a pending application for the creation of a historic district in my neighborhood, and my house would fall within the boundaries of that historic district. So I would obviously recuse from that case should it be heard by the board. In addition, I have an involvement with, prior to this last fiscal year, I've had an involvement with parts of the St. Elizabeth's campus, particularly the CT campus, the parcel where the Whitman Walker Clinic is now opened, and the new row houses that are adjacent therein, as well as the town center that's, may or may not, come in the coming years. So I've recused myself from those cases. Starting this past fiscal year, I'm on a team that will hopefully be developing a microgrid on the campus, and thus my recusal for the St. Elizabeth's campus would encompass the full campus. And so I disclosed that in my filing to you.
And so, and I'm assuming in the future, there might be some others that come up. So how do you handle them?
Oh, I don't participate in any cases that are related to that direct conflict.
Ms. Failer, same question to you.
I'm not aware currently of any conflicts that I might have, but should those be presented, I would recuse myself from the case. If it were a physical meeting, I would not sit at the dais. I would go back in the meeting room until the case was presented and completed. If it's a virtual meeting, I would turn off my camera and not participate in the meeting until that case is completed, and then I would rejoin the meeting.
Mr. Marzella?
So as I stated, my agency reviews cases that are subject to Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, meaning federally led projects. Generally speaking, the HPRB does not review those cases as they're not subject to DC permit design review. There is an exceedingly rare instance in which DC government projects within a certain planning area, the central area of downtown, are subject to Section 106 under the auspices of the National Capital Planning Commission. Based on initial guidance from my agency's Office of General Counsel, in those very limited cases, I would recuse myself from review from the board, but I'm not aware of any other conflicts.
And Mr. Williams?
Yeah, so similar to Ms. Failer, I'm not aware of any conflicts right now. And should there be anyone that arise, I definitely would recuse myself fully from any deliberations on that item.
Last question. I asked this in the pre-hearing questions, but I always ask it at hearings itself. Do you have any outstanding liability for taxes, fees, other payments to the district, federal or other state and local governments? Mr. Marzella?
No.
Mr. Auerbach?
I do not.
Mr. Williams?
I do not.
Ms.
do not.
Failer? Years ago, the council, I think, confirmed somebody, this was a different board. Turned out that they had lots of taxes owed. It was a little bit embarrassing. That's why I always ask the question. It's not disqualifying, but then I would ask, is there a payment plan? Do you have some plan for taking care of the liability? Give me just a second. Let me just look. I do not have any other questions for you. If there's anything else you want to submit, I'm not asking you to, please do so by 5 p.m. on Monday. Thank you, each of you, 2 of you for your service thus far, all 4 of you for your willingness to serve. Appreciate that very much. As I said, the record in this matter will close at 5 p.m. on Monday, April 1st. And it's my intention, because of the quorum issue, to get this before the council on Tuesday, April 2nd. With that, I'm going to close down this hearing. The time is 2:28 in the afternoon, and this roundtable is adjourned.